You always stop for strangers in a storm, or just women who look lost? She asked, snow clinging to her hair. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever helped someone during a crisis and later discovered they weren't who you thought they were? And where are you watching from? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real emotional stories. Let's begin. The storm hit Northbridge the way bad news hits a family, fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. By 4:10 p.m. Snow had swallowed the sidewalks, turned streetlights into pale halos, and buried the curbs so completely that even the city plows looked hesitant. Daniel Harper kept both hands on the wheel of his old Ford, eyes narrowing through the white blur, while his son Noah hummed to himself in the back seat like the world wasn't trying to freeze. Noah was 7, thin, bright, stubbornly cheerful. He wore a puffy jacket that was already too small and a knit hat Daniel had stitched once, late at night, with hands that trembled from exhaustion. Daniel had learned to sew for the same reason he'd learned everything else, because paying someone else was a luxury. "Dad," Noah said, peering out the window. "This is a real storm." "Yep," Daniel answered, keeping his voice calm. "But we're beating it." He told Noah that, even though the radio had already used words like "wide out" and "stay off the roads." He told Noah that because fathers told their kids what they needed to hear, especially when they weren't sure themselves. Daniel worked for the city, maintenance and emergency response, signals, streetlights, backup generators, the ugly guts of a big place that people only remembered existed when it failed. The job didn't make him important to anyone, except Noah. And lately, not even the city treated Daniel like he mattered. He'd felt it since last winter, since the day he'd refused to sign off on a perfectly acceptable de-icing contract that didn't meet safety specs. The paperwork had been clean. The numbers were pretty. But the salt concentration was wrong, and Daniel had been the one who would have had to explain it when ambulances slid through intersections. He'd said no. 2 weeks later, he'd been reassigned. Fewer hours. Worse routes. Supervisors who stopped meeting his eyes. A quiet punishment, the kind that didn't leave bruises, only bills. The truck shuddered. Daniel frowned, tapped the gas gently. The engine coughed like a smoker trying to laugh. "Come on," he muttered. Noah leaned forward between the seats. "Is it making that sound again?" Daniel tried the ignition rhythm he'd learned, easing it, coaxing it, like the truck was an old dog that needed patience. For another block, it held. Then, 3 blocks from home, it died. No warning. No mercy. Just a final metallic cough, and silence that felt too big. Daniel turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. The wind slapped the side of the truck so hard it rocked. Snow filled the windshield like someone had thrown a sheet over the world. Noah's voice went small. "Dad?" Daniel swallowed once, then smiled in the rearview mirror like smiling could fix engines. "Okay," he said, already reaching into the back for the emergency bag. "Plan B. We walk." He bundled Noah tight, blanket over both of them, Noah's little arms around his neck, then stepped out into a storm that stole the breath right out of his lungs. The cold was sharp, bright, and mean, but Northbridge wasn't dark. Even in a blizzard, the city glowed, orange streetlights, neon signs blurred into watercolor streaks, the shimmer of snow reflecting every bit of light back at you. It was beautiful, in the same way fire could be beautiful, only if you respected it. Daniel took one step, then another, boots crunching through deepening drifts. Halfway down the block, he saw hazards blinking ahead, 2 angry amber eyes in the snow. An SUV sat crooked near the curb, half buried already. The driver's door was open. A woman stood beside it with her phone pressed to her ear, hair whipping around her face, coat too thin for the weather. She looked up when Daniel approached, and for a second she didn't move, like she couldn't decide whether he was rescue or risk. "Are you okay?" Daniel shouted over the wind. "My car won't move," she called back, voice tight. They said help could be ours. She stopped, swallowed hard. My daughter is home. That word, daughter, hit Daniel like a hand to the chest. He shifted Noah higher on his shoulder. Noah's fingers clutched Daniel's collar, trembling. You can't stay out here, Daniel said. The woman's eyes flicked to Noah, and something softened in her expression, fear turning into determination. I know, she whispered. Then, as if it cost her pride, she added, please. Daniel didn't ask what she did for a living, or why her gloves looked expensive but wrong for this storm, or why her phone screen, when it lit for a second, showed a dozen missed calls labeled with titles instead of names. He just nodded. Come with us, he said. I'm Daniel. That's Noah. A beat. Then she stepped closer, shoulders squared like she was walking into a boardroom instead of a blizzard. Olivia, she said. Olivia Bennett. They moved as a group, Daniel carving a path, Noah tucked against him, Olivia stumbling in shoes that weren't made for survival. Twice she slipped, and twice Daniel steadied her with an elbow or a hand, brief, careful contact, as if he was afraid she'd pull away. When they reached Daniel's building, Olivia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Inside the lobby, the wind disappeared, and the quiet felt holy. Daniel carried Noah up the stairs, breath steaming, and unlocked apartment 2C. The place was small, warm, lived in. Not fancy, but bright. A little strand of cheap winter lights blinked along the window. A child's drawing of a rocket ship was taped to the fridge. A pot sat on the stove like it had been waiting for someone to come home. Daniel set Noah down gently. Dry clothes, he told him. Then hot chocolate. Noah nodded and disappeared into the bedroom without argument, because Noah had learned, like Daniel, that storms didn't negotiate. Daniel turned to Olivia. You're freezing, he said. Bathroom's there. I've got sweatpants and a flannel. It'll be too big, but it'll be warm. Olivia hesitated. A woman used to control didn't like accepting help. Daniel recognized it because he'd lived it, just from the other side. Thank you, she said finally, and the words sounded unfamiliar on her tongue. While she changed, Daniel lit the little stove, set water to boil, and checked his phone, no signal. Of course. Northbridge always chose the worst moments to remind you how fragile modern life really was. When Olivia came out, she looked different in his clothes, less like a statue, more like a person. Her hair had fallen loose, cheeks flushed from cold, eyes bright with something she tried hard to hide. I need to call my daughter, she said quickly. Ava. She's 8. She's with a babysitter but. Daniel pointed to the old landline on the side table. Use that, he said. Storm knocks out towers first. Olivia stared at the phone like it belonged in a museum, then grabbed it with both hands and dialed. Daniel didn't listen closely. He didn't need to. He heard the relief in her voice when someone answered. He heard her soften when a small voice came on the line. He saw her shoulders drop like she'd been holding up the whole world by herself. And Daniel Harper, tired, broke, quietly punished for doing the right thing, felt something shift in the room. Like this night wasn't just weather. Like the storm had brought a stranger to his door, and with her, the beginning of consequences neither of them could see yet. By the time Noah sat at the tiny kitchen table with a steaming mug of hot chocolate, the apartment felt like a different universe from the street outside. The wind still howled beyond the window, but in here the air smelled like cocoa, laundry detergent, and the faint cinnamon Daniel sprinkled on everything when he wanted it to feel like a real home. Olivia stood near the heater vent in Daniel's oversized flannel, hands wrapped around a mug he'd offered her. She didn't drink yet. She watched Noah instead, how he blew on the surface carefully, how he smiled at Daniel like the storm was just another adventure. You're a good dad, she said softly. Daniel gave a quick shrug, as if compliments were bills he couldn't afford to accept. I'm just present. That's most of it. Olivia's mouth tightened at that, like the words hit something bruised. Noah looked up. Are you going back to your daughter now? Olivia blinked, then forced a smile for him. Not tonight, sweetheart. The roads are closed. Noah nodded with the easy acceptance kids had when adults sounded certain. Then he squinted at Olivia. You talk like my teacher. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Your teacher doesn't threaten people with quarterly earnings, does she? Olivia almost laughed, but stopped herself. No. Probably not. Daniel caught it, that near laugh. It didn't match the tension in her shoulders, or the way she kept checking her phone even though it still showed no bars. She wasn't just worried about a child. She was worried about being unreachable. Daniel pretended not to notice. He'd learned the safest way to handle powerful storms, weather or people, was to give them space. He busied himself digging through a drawer. I've got a spare charger, if the power doesn't flicker. Thank you, Olivia said again, and the word sounded like she was practicing it. When Daniel turned, he saw her eyes move, quick, assessing, taking in the apartment the way an inspector might. The patched sofa. The second-hand bookshelf. The framed photo by the window, Daniel holding Noah as a toddler, a woman beside them with a warm smile, her hair tucked behind her ear. Olivia's gaze paused there a fraction too long. Daniel followed her eyes. That's my wife. Emma. I'm sorry, Olivia said immediately. Daniel nodded once. 2 winters ago. Flu turned into pneumonia. Fast. He didn't add the rest, that the hospital had been overwhelmed, that the city's emergency supply systems had failed, that he'd sat in a plastic chair listening to machines, thinking how unfair it was that the world kept functioning while his didn't. Olivia's fingers tightened on her mug. That shouldn't happen, she murmured. It does, Daniel said, not bitter, just factual. And then you wake up and you still have to make lunches. Noah, hearing his mother's name, lowered his eyes to his drink. Daniel reached over and ruffled his hair gently, a silent promise, we're okay. We're still here. Olivia looked away as if she'd witnessed something too intimate. Then her phone lit up for a split second, 1 bar flickered into existence like a miracle, and a notification flashed before it vanished again. Daniel didn't mean to see it. But he saw the name at the top. M. Keller, board chair. And beneath it, the preview line, where are you? Don't forget who built you. Olivia's thumb moved fast, locking the screen. Daniel said nothing. But something inside him clicked into place. Board chair. Not a friend. Not family. Someone who expected obedience. Olivia set the phone down too carefully, like it was dangerous. My work is complicated, she said, as if reading his thoughts. Daniel leaned back against the counter. Most work is. Mine just involves more frozen pipes. That earned her a real smile this time, small, tired, human. A sudden thunk hit the window. Snow sliding off the ledge. Noah jumped. It's okay, Daniel said quickly. Just snow. But as he said it, his mind drifted, back to last winter, to the day he'd been told his route was changing again. Back to the paperwork he'd refused to sign. Back to the man who'd leaned close and murmured like it was advice. You want to keep that kid warm? Stop making enemies. Daniel had told himself he was imagining the threat. Until his truck started breaking down more often. Until his overtime requests got denied. Until someone sprayed the word rat in black paint on the utility locker at his last job site. He'd scrubbed it off before his crew arrived. Noah never saw. But Daniel never forgot. Olivia's eyes flicked to him. What is it? Daniel shook his head. Nothing. Just, storms make you remember things. Olivia hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the apartment had ears. Daniel, if you ever feel like someone is pressuring you, punishing you for doing the right thing. He stared at her, surprised. She swallowed, and for a moment her guard slipped. Sometimes, people with power don't like honesty. They call it disloyalty. Daniel studied her face, the controlled expression, the careful words, the shadows under her eyes that didn't come from one bad night. You're not just some stranded driver, he said quietly. Olivia held his gaze. And you're not just a maintenance worker. In the next room, Noah began to yawn. The storm kept hammering the city, but the apartment stayed warm, bright with cheap winter lights and the soft hum of the heater. Daniel looked toward the window, where the street lamps turned the falling snow into glitter. Outside, Northbridge was locked in ice. Inside, two strangers sat at the edge of truths they weren't ready to say out loud, while the past waited, patient as winter, for its chance to return. Morning didn't arrive gently. It forced its way into Northbridge with blinding white light reflecting off snowdrifts taller than cars. The storm had stopped, but the silence it left behind felt almost louder. Daniel stood at the apartment window, coffee in hand, watching plows carve slow paths through the streets. Olivia stood beside him, now back in her own clothes, composed again, distant again. But something between them had shifted overnight. Noah sat on the floor building a crooked tower from mismatched blocks. Is the city broken? He asked. Daniel crouched beside him. No. Just buried. Olivia looked at Daniel carefully, as if weighing something unspoken. May I borrow your phone? I think the towers are back. He handed it to her without hesitation. She stepped into the hallway for privacy, but Daniel still caught fragments of her voice, low, firm, no longer hesitant. Yes, I'm aware. No, Keller does not make that decision. And if the emergency contract fails again, it will be on record who signed it. Daniel's jaw tightened. Emergency contract. The same phrase that had cost him hours. The same vendor. The same winter salt formula he'd flagged as unsafe. Olivia returned minutes later, expression unreadable. I need to go, she said. My driver will reach the corner soon. Driver. Daniel nodded once. Of course. Before leaving, Olivia crouched in front of Noah. Thank you for sharing your hot chocolate with me. Noah grinned. Next time we'll make extra. Olivia froze at those words, next time, as if she wasn't used to being invited back into simple things. She stood and faced Daniel. You did something most people wouldn't. I walked, he said lightly. You chose, she corrected. Then she left. 3 weeks passed. Life returned to routine. Daniel worked double shifts clearing damaged streetlights. Noah caught a cold but recovered fast. Bills stacked neatly on the kitchen counter like silent judges. And then the letter arrived. Heavy envelope. Silver crest embossed at the top. Bennett Infrastructure Group. Daniel stared at the name for a long time before opening it. Inside was a formal invitation to corporate headquarters, Level 42, Executive Offices. The language was polite. Precise. Regarding your previous internal report on emergency de-icing safety protocols. Daniel's pulse quickened. He hadn't used Olivia's last name that night. She hadn't offered more than Olivia Bennett. He grabbed his phone and searched. Her face filled the screen instantly. Olivia Bennett, CEO, Bennett Infrastructure Group. Largest municipal contractor in Northbridge. The same company that had supplied the salt contract he'd refused to approve. Daniel sat down slowly. That night hadn't been coincidence. Bennett Tower rose from downtown like a blade of glass cutting into winter sky. Daniel felt underdressed the moment he stepped inside. Marble floors. Quiet elevators. Receptionists who smiled like they'd been trained to measure worth in seconds. Mr. Harper, the assistant said. She's expecting you. The elevator climbed to level 42. When the doors opened, Daniel saw Olivia at the far end of a sunlit office, city skyline behind her. No flannel. No borrowed warmth. Just tailored precision. "Daniel," she said, stepping forward. He stopped several feet away. "You knew." "Yes. You knew who I was. I recognized your name the next morning. I had someone pull your file." Daniel's expression hardened. "So this is what? Charity? Guilt?" Olivia shook her head sharply. "No. It's accountability." She walked to her desk and placed a thick folder in front of him. "These are internal memos regarding the emergency salt contract you refused to sign. The board overruled safety recommendations last year." Daniel opened the file. His own report stared back at him, highlighted. "You were right," Olivia said quietly. "And I didn't know." Daniel looked up. "You're the CEO. And I inherited a board that believes profit equals survival," she replied. "Chairman Keller approved that vendor personally." The name from the phone. Daniel's mind raced. "So why call me here?" Olivia held his gaze steadily. "Because I'm restructuring our city emergency division. I want someone who understands the system from the ground up. Someone who won't sign off on something dangerous." Daniel let out a short, disbelieving breath. "You want me to work here? I want you to lead the new emergency preparedness initiative for Northbridge." The room went silent. "You realize what that looks like," Daniel said. "A maintenance worker jumps into corporate leadership. They'll say I'm your project." "They already think you're my weakness," Olivia replied calmly. Daniel blinked. "Keller believes your refusal last year cost the company millions. He thinks you embarrassed us. When he learned I spent the storm in your apartment," she didn't finish the sentence. Daniel understood. This wasn't charity. This was a fight. "And if I say no?" Daniel asked. Olivia didn't hesitate. "Then I respect it. But the city will face another storm next winter. And the same board will still prioritize margins over lives." Daniel thought of Noah. Of ambulances sliding through intersections. Of Emma. He closed the folder slowly. "You're asking me to step into a war I didn't start." Olivia met him eye to eye. "No. I'm asking you to finish one you already began." Outside the glass walls, snow began falling again, soft this time. Almost peaceful. But Daniel Harper understood something now. The first storm had been weather. The second would be power. Daniel didn't answer that day. He went home, sat at the small kitchen table, and read the folder again while Noah drew snowplows on scrap paper. Emergency salt dilution charts. Internal warnings. Cost projections. And in the margins, emails from Chairman Marcus Keller pushing for efficiency. Daniel closed his eyes. He had spent years believing the system was simply flawed. Now he saw something worse, it was defended. 2 days later, he stood again in Bennett Tower. "I'll do it," he told Olivia. "But not as a favor. Not as your rescue story." Olivia nodded once. "Agreed. And I want full authority to audit current contracts." A pause. "That will make enemies," she said quietly. "I already have them." The Emergency Preparedness Initiative launched fast. Daniel moved through departments like someone who knew exactly where the weak beams were. He asked uncomfortable questions. He requested independent lab testing. He demanded transparency. At first, employees watched him like an outsider who wouldn't last. Then they noticed something different. He didn't blame. He didn't posture. He listened. He brought in city engineers, paramedics, utility crews, the people who were actually outside during storms. He asked what failed. What froze. What broke first? For the first time, those voices were documented. And that made someone nervous. One evening, Daniel found his office computer locked. Security protocol, IT told him stiffly. Board review. The next morning, an anonymous article appeared online. CEO's special hire raises nepotism questions. A photo of Daniel entering Bennett Tower. A cropped image of Olivia from a charity gala. Noah saw it at school before Daniel did. Are you in trouble? Noah asked that night, small hands gripping the newspaper printout a classmate had shown him. Daniel crouched to eye level. No. Sometimes when you try to fix something broken, the broken part fights back. Noah nodded slowly. Like when I pull weeds. Exactly like that. The real blow came a week later. Keller requested a private board session. Daniel wasn't invited. Olivia was. She returned late that night, calling Daniel from her car. They want you removed, she said plainly. Daniel leaned against his apartment window, watching snow swirl under the street lamp. Why? Because you requested third-party validation on the salt contract. The results came back this afternoon. And? Silence. It fails minimum safety standards in extreme freeze conditions. Daniel felt no triumph, only confirmation. So they knew, he said. Yes. And they approved it anyway. Yes. The wind rattled his window. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. On the other end of the line, Olivia's voice changed, not corporate, not careful. I'm going to force a public review. That could cost you your position. It could, she agreed. Daniel stared at the snow. I didn't step into this to ruin your career. You stepped into it to protect the city, she replied. So did I. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning. Northbridge's mayor stood beside Olivia. Cameras flashed. Headlines were ready. Olivia stepped to the podium. Bennett Infrastructure Group has identified safety failures in a previous emergency contract, she said steadily. We take full responsibility. Gasps. Reporters shouting questions. Behind the cameras, Keller watched with a face carved from stone. Olivia continued. Effective immediately, we are terminating the contract and restructuring board oversight policies. Daniel stood off to the side, hands in his coat pockets, heart pounding. She hadn't thrown him under the bus. She hadn't hidden behind legal language. She'd chosen integrity. Later that evening, Keller's resignation hit the news. Not forced. Voluntary. Daniel knew better. The real test came sooner than expected. Another storm rolled toward Northbridge 3 weeks later, fast and brutal. But this time, new protocols were active. Pre-treated roads. Verified de-icing supply. Coordinated emergency routing. Daniel worked through the night alongside city crews. Olivia monitored response systems from the command center, sleeves rolled up. The city held. No major accidents. No gridlock. No emergency vehicles sliding through intersections. At dawn, Daniel stepped outside the operations center and watched snow fall in soft, steady sheets. His phone buzzed. A photo from Olivia. Ava and Noah sitting at a kitchen table together, coloring side by side. He didn't smile immediately. He exhaled. The storm had passed. But this time, no one had been sacrificed to survive it. The city didn't throw a parade. There were no fireworks over Northbridge, no statues erected for emergency preparedness. The headlines moved on within days. But something subtle had changed. Ambulance response times improved. Utility failures dropped. And for the first winter in years, no family blamed the ice for something that shouldn't have happened. Daniel didn't need applause. He needed proof. He found it one quiet evening when Noah ran into the apartment waving a school flyer. "Dad! They're doing a Thank You City Workers Week. My teacher says we're writing letters." Daniel laughed softly. "That's nice." Noah looked up at him seriously. "I'm writing mine to you." Daniel turned away for a second, pretending to check the stove. He had faced down corporate pressure, media whispers, and a boardroom battle that could have crushed him. But this almost undid him. Olivia's world shifted too. Restructuring the board had cost her allies. Some investors withdrew quietly. Others tested her authority. But public trust rose. And for the first time since inheriting her father's company, she didn't feel like she was defending a legacy. She was building one. One evening, she stood in Daniel's small apartment kitchen again, this time by choice, not necessity. The winter light still blinked near the window. The place felt warmer than the penthouse she rarely slept in. Ava and Noah sat cross-legged on the floor arguing about crayons. "You're using all the blue," Ava protested. "It's a snowstorm." Noah argued back. "It needs blue." Olivia watched them, a softness in her expression she no longer tried to hide. Daniel leaned against the counter. "You ever think about how close that first night was?" he asked. "To what?" she said quietly. "To me just driving past your SUV." Olivia didn't answer immediately. "I was used to people driving past," she admitted. "In different ways." Daniel understood that more than she realized. "I almost didn't stop," he confessed. She looked at him, surprised. The truck had just died. Noah was freezing. "I was tired of being the guy who fixes things no one thanks him for." "And yet you did." Daniel nodded once. "Because he was watching." Olivia followed his gaze to the children. "Yes," she said. "They always are." Months passed. Daniel's role expanded naturally. Not into executive glamour, but into influence where it mattered. He worked with city officials, field crews, emergency planners. He never forgot where he'd come from. He refused a corner office. He kept his boots by the door. And Olivia? She stopped hiding in polished boardrooms. She showed up at community briefings. She met utility workers face to face. She asked questions, and listened to answers. Their connection didn't explode into romance overnight. It grew quietly, through shared responsibility, through evenings reviewing city maps at Daniel's kitchen table, through laughter when Ava insisted they were co-managers of snow. The first time Daniel held Olivia's hand, it wasn't dramatic. It was at a school winter concert. Ava and Noah stood side by side on stage, off-key but determined. Olivia's fingers brushed his. Neither pulled away. Years later, another snowfall blanketed Northbridge. Daniel stood by the window of a larger home now, still modest, still warm. Behind him, the sounds of children arguing about hot chocolate echoed down the hallway. Olivia joined him, slipping an arm around his waist. "Storm warnings again," she said. Daniel watched the snow drift gently under the streetlights. He didn't see danger anymore. He saw preparation. Community. Choice. "I used to think I saved you that night," he said quietly. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "And? I think we saved each other. Not with money. Not with titles. But with recognition. With honesty. With the decision, on a freezing night when walking away would have been easier, to stop." Behind them, Noah called out, "Dad. Ava says you make the best cocoa. Is that true?" Daniel smiled. "Only one way to find out," he replied. He turned from the window. Outside, snow fell peacefully. Inside, warmth held steady. And in Northbridge, the storm was no longer something to fear. but something that had once changed everything. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.